In the bustling halls of the Metropolitan County Courthouse, a scene was about to unfold that would leave a lasting impression on everyone present. It was a typical Wednesday morning in early spring, with the usual crowd of lawyers, defendants, and court staff hurrying through security checkpoints and metal detectors. Among them was Officer Thompson, a 23-year-old recent police academy graduate who'd been on the force for just 8 months. Fresh-faced and brimming with an air of unearned confidence, he strode through the courthouse like he owned it. His pristine uniform and perfectly polished badge reflected his meticulous attention to appearance, but his attitude told a different story, one of a young officer who had yet to learn the valuable lesson of humility. The young officer was there to testify in a routine traffic violation case. As he waited outside courtroom 304, he casually leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging the senior officers who passed by with respectful nods to their colleagues. His training sergeant had warned him numerous times about his overconfident demeanor, but Thompson had dismissed these concerns, convinced that his top-of-class graduation from the academy was all the validation he needed. Little did he know, the judge presiding over his case that day was the Honorable Judge Richardson, a highly respected figure in the legal community with over 3 decades of experience on the bench. Judge Richardson had worked his way up from humble beginnings, breaking barriers as one of the first black judges in the district. He was known for his fair rulings, sharp intellect, and most importantly, his unwavering commitment to maintaining proper courtroom decorum. As Officer Thompson entered the courtroom, he barely glanced at the judge's bench. Instead of the customary respectful bow or nod, he sauntered in with his hand in his pocket, chewing gum. The court clerk's eyes widened at this display, and a few veteran officers present in the gallery exchanged knowing looks. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense as Judge Richardson observed the young officer's behavior with a calm but scrutinizing gaze. When called to the stand, Thompson took his time walking up, his body language radiating casual indifference. As he sat down, he leaned back in the witness chair, treating it more like a lounge chair than the sacred space it represented in the courtroom. The court reporter raised an eyebrow as she prepared to record what would soon become one of the most memorable testimonies in the courthouse's recent history. "Officer," Judge Richardson began, his deep voice carrying the weight of his years of experience, "please state your name and badge number for the record." Thompson replied with a slight smirk, "Yeah, it's Officer Thompson, badge 6402. The judge's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly at the informal response. The questioning continued, and with each answer, Thompson's responses grew increasingly casual and borderline disrespectful. He used phrases like, "yeah," and "nah," instead of, "yes, Your Honor," or "no, Your Honor." When asked to elaborate on the details of the traffic stop, he spoke as if recounting a story to friends at a coffee shop rather than providing testimony in a court of law. The breaking point came when Judge Richardson asked Thompson to clarify a discrepancy in his written report. Instead of addressing the question professionally, Thompson rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Man, this is such a waste of time." The courtroom fell silent. Even the defendant and their attorney froze in their seats. The seasoned bailiff, who had seen countless courtroom dramas unfold over the years, held his breath. Judge Richardson slowly removed his reading glasses and placed them on the bench before him. The tension in the air was palpable as Judge Richardson leaned forward, his fingers interlaced before him. The young officer's demeanor had crossed a line that even rookie cops knew better than to approach. The next few moments would teach Officer Thompson a lesson that no academy training could have prepared him for. As the gallery watched in stunned silence, Judge Richardson prepared to address the situation. The morning sun streaming through the high courthouse windows seemed to dim, as if nature itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Officer Thompson, still oblivious to the gravity of his actions, sat in the witness chair, about to learn why respect in the courtroom wasn't just a suggestion, it was an absolute necessity. The story of what happened next would soon spread through every precinct and courthouse in the district, serving as a powerful reminder about the importance of respect, professionalism, and the consequences of unchecked arrogance in the justice system. Judge Richardson's voice cut through the silence like a steel blade. "Officer Thompson," he began, each syllable measured and precise, "in my 32 years on this bench, I have seen thousands of officers testify in this courtroom. Each of them, regardless of their years of service, has shown the basic respect that this court deserves." The young officer's smirk began to fade as Judge Richardson slowly rose from his seat. Standing at his full height, the judge's presence seemed to fill the entire courtroom. The morning light cast his shadow long across the floor, reaching almost to where Thompson sat, still in the witness chair. "Let me educate you on something that apparently wasn't covered in your academy training," Judge Richardson continued, his voice remaining calm but carrying an authority that made everyone in the courtroom sit up straighter. "This court represents over 2 centuries of legal tradition. Every person who enters this room, be they a janitor or a senior justice, shows respect not to me personally, but to what this institution represents: justice, equality under the law, and the foundation of our civil society." Thompson's face began to pale as the reality of his situation finally started to sink in. The other officers in the gallery watched intently, some shaking their heads slightly at the young officer's predicament. A veteran detective in the back row whispered to his partner, "Kids about to learn what they can't teach you in training. Your badge, Officer Thompson, carries with it not just authority, but responsibility," Judge Richardson continued, gesturing to the polished shield on Thompson's chest. "Every officer before you has earned the right to wear it through not just their training, but their understanding that they serve the public, all of the public, with respect and dignity." The judge picked up a thick law book from his bench, its worn leather cover testament to years of use. "In this courtroom, we have heard testimonies that have changed lives. We have witnessed justice being served to the highest and lowest in our society. And in every single one of those cases, the officers who stood where you stand now understood the gravity of their role." Thompson's earlier confidence had completely evaporated. He sat rigid in his chair, hands gripping his knees, as sweat began to bead on his forehead. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype, capturing every word of what was quickly becoming a legendary moment in the courthouse's history. "Your conduct today," Judge Richardson continued, placing the law book down with deliberate care, "shows not just disrespect to this court, but a fundamental misunderstanding of your role as a law enforcement officer. You are not above the law, Officer Thompson. You are its servant, just as I am, just as every person in this room is." A senior officer in the gallery nodded approvingly. He had worked with Judge Richardson on cases for over 2 decades and had seen him mentor countless young officers who had appeared before him. But this was different. This was a lesson that needed to be learned the hard way. "I could hold you in contempt," the judge said, his voice taking on a thoughtful tone. "I could have you spend a few days in a cell, reflecting on your behavior." Thompson's eyes widened at this possibility, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "However," Judge Richardson continued, "I believe there's a more valuable lesson to be learned here." The judge reached for another book on his bench, this one smaller but equally well worn. "For the next 30 days, Officer Thompson, you will report to this courthouse every morning at 7 a.m. You will sit in on every case in this courtroom, observing how justice is properly administered. You will write a daily reflection on what you observe, particularly noting the professionalism of your fellow officers who testify." A murmur of approval rippled through the courtroom. The punishment was both fair and educational, exactly what everyone had come to expect from Judge Richardson. Some of the veteran officers exchanged knowing looks. They had seen this kind of correction before, and they knew its value. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "you will spend 2 hours each evening studying the history of this courthouse and the significant cases that have shaped our community. The court librarian will provide you with the necessary materials." He paused, making direct eye contact with Thompson. "And yes, officer, there will be a final presentation in front of this court about what you've learned." Thompson's face had transformed from its earlier arrogance to something between shock and shame. The reality of his situation, and the very public nature of his lesson, had finally hit home. His voice, when he finally found it, was barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." "I didn't quite hear that, Officer Thompson," Judge Richardson said, one eyebrow raised expectantly. "Yes, Your Honor," Thompson repeated, this time with proper volume and respect, sitting up straight in his chair. "Very well," the judge nodded. "And one more thing, Officer Thompson. The next time you enter any courtroom, remember this moment. Remember that the uniform you wear and the badge you carry are symbols of public trust. They are not licenses for disrespect or arrogance." As Thompson left the witness stand, his steps were noticeably different from his earlier swagger. The other officers in the gallery watched him pass, their expressions a mix of sympathy and understanding. They had all been young once, had all learned important lessons along the way. This was Thompson's moment of learning, and it was one he would never forget. The next morning arrived with a crisp dawn, finding Officer Thompson standing outside the courthouse at exactly 6:45 a.m. His uniform was still pristine, but his demeanor had undergone a visible transformation. Gone was the casual swagger of yesterday, replaced by an alertness that spoke of a sleepless night spent reflecting on his actions. The courthouse security guards, who had witnessed his behavior the previous day, noted the change with subtle nods as he passed through the metal detectors. Today, Thompson removed his cap before entering the building, and his "good morning" to the staff carried none of yesterday's flippant tone. As he settled into his assigned seat in courtroom 304, Thompson pulled out a fresh notebook and pen. The court clerk, arriving early to prepare for the day's proceedings, noticed him reviewing yesterday's case files with focused attention. She had seen many officers come and go through these halls, but few transformations had begun quite as dramatically as this one. The first case of the day involved a veteran officer testifying about a domestic violence incident. Thompson watched intently as the officer, with 20 years of experience under his belt, demonstrated exactly what Judge Richardson had spoken about. Every "Your Honor" was delivered with genuine respect, every detail of the case presented with professional clarity. During a brief recess, that same veteran officer approached Thompson. "First day of your 30, he asked, though it wasn't really a question. When Thompson nodded, the older officer pulled up a chair. "You know, son, I had my own moment like yours, about 18 years ago. Different judge, same lesson." Thompson looked up, surprise evident in his expression. The older officer continued, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "We all think we know everything when we first put on the badge. I certainly did. Want to know what changed my perspective?" For the next 15 minutes, Thompson listened as the veteran shared stories from his career, tales of humility learned, respect earned, and lessons that no academy could teach. As more officers filtered into the courtroom for their cases, several stopped to add their own experiences, creating an impromptu mentoring session. One detective shared how a similar lesson early in his career had actually saved his life years later. "Because I learned to check my ego," he explained, "I started listening more carefully to people on the street. That attention to detail and respect for others helped me notice things I might have missed before. It made me a better cop." As the morning session resumed, Thompson found himself taking notes not just on the proceedings, but on the subtle interactions he observed. He noticed how the most respected officers in the department carried themselves with quiet confidence rather than bravado. They spoke with precision and clarity, their testimonies helping to serve justice rather than showcase their authority. During lunch break, Thompson made his way to the court library as instructed. The librarian, a woman who had served the courthouse for over 2 decades, was expecting him. Judge Richardson called ahead, she explained, pulling out several volumes. He suggested we start with the founding of this courthouse and work our way forward. As Thompson began his research, he discovered something unexpected. The building he had so casually strolled through yesterday had been the site of numerous historical moments in the civil rights movement. The very courtroom where he had shown such disrespect had once hosted cases that helped shape the nation's journey toward equality. The afternoon session brought a different type of case, a young woman testifying about a theft that had left her feeling violated and unsafe. Thompson watched as officers handled her case with sensitivity and professionalism, their testimony helping to bring her some measure of peace. He found himself noting how their courtroom conduct added weight and credibility to their words. As the day drew to a close, Thompson stayed behind to complete his first daily reflection. Sitting in the now quiet courtroom, he wrote about more than just the day's proceedings. He detailed his observations about the different ways officers presented themselves, the impact of their testimony on the lives of real people, and the profound responsibility that came with wearing the badge. The court janitor, working his evening routine, paused near Thompson's seat. "You know," the older man said, leaning on his mop, "I've been cleaning these floors for 30 years. Seen all kinds of people come through here, good cops, bad cops, scared cops, brave cops. But the best ones? They're the ones who learn to see this place like I do, as a place where everyone, no matter who they are, deserves respect." Thompson looked up from his notebook, really seeing the janitor for the first time. The man's words carried a wisdom that struck him deeply. "How do you see it?" Thompson asked, genuinely curious. The janitor gestured around the empty courtroom. "Every morning, I clean these floors, polish these benches, make sure everything shines. Know why? Because maybe today's the day someone's whole life changes in here. Maybe they're getting justice they've waited years for, or maybe they're finally taking responsibility for their actions. Either way, they deserve to walk into a courtroom that shows them their story matters." As Thompson packed up his materials for the day, he caught his reflection in one of the courtroom windows. His uniform was the same, his badge still shone, but something in his eyes had changed. The arrogant rookie from yesterday was beginning to fade, replaced by something more thoughtful, more aware. Walking out of the courthouse that evening, Thompson passed Judge Richardson's chamber. The light was still on, and through the partially open door, he could see the judge working late, reviewing cases with the same careful attention he'd shown for decades. Thompson paused for a moment, then continued on, carrying with him the first real understanding of what it truly meant to serve and protect. This was just day 1 of 30, but already the lesson was taking root. The young officer who had swaggered into court yesterday was starting to understand that true authority comes not from a badge or uniform, but from the respect one shows for the law, the system, and most importantly, for every person whose life is touched by it. A week into his courthouse lessons, Officer Thompson was beginning to see patterns he had never noticed before. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the city skyline as he settled into what had become his seat in courtroom 304, already reviewing his notes from the previous day's sessions. The security guards now greeted him by name, and the court clerk occasionally saved him a cup of coffee from the staff room. Today's first case involved a traffic violation similar to the one that had led to his own humbling experience. But this time, Thompson watched with new eyes as another young officer, one who had graduated from the academy just a month after him, handled his testimony. The difference in their approaches was stark and enlightening. The young officer demonstrated everything Thompson had been learning about proper courtroom conduct. His uniform was immaculate, his testimony clear and professional, and his respect for the court genuine. After the session, Thompson approached him in the hallway. "That was impressive in there," Thompson said, introducing himself. "Would you mind sharing some tips?" I'm learning how to do better." The officer smiled knowingly. "Word gets around," he replied without judgment. "Truth is, I was terrified of messing up in court. My field training officer made me sit in on court sessions for 2 weeks straight during my probationary period. Best training I ever had." As they talked, Thompson learned that many senior officers had developed their own methods for preparing newer officers for courtroom testimony. Some precincts had informal mentoring programs, others had created unofficial guides passed down through generations of officers. It was a whole aspect of police work he had previously dismissed as unimportant. Later that morning, during a brief recess, Judge Richardson noticed Thompson taking detailed notes about an interaction between a public defender and a witness. The judge observed how the young officer's expression had changed over the past week, the smugness replaced by genuine curiosity. "Officer Thompson," the judge called out as people filed out for the break. "A moment, please." Thompson approached the bench with the proper respect he had now learned was more than just ceremony. "Yes, Your Honor." "I've been reading your daily reflections," Judge Richardson said, removing his reading glasses. "Your latest one about the importance of body language in testimony was particularly insightful. Have you considered sharing these observations with your fellow officers?" Thompson was caught off guard by the question. "I hadn't thought about it, Your Honor. Would that be appropriate?" The judge leaned back slightly. "Officer Thompson, the purpose of this exercise was never just about punishment. It's about growth and understanding. The lessons you're learning here, they could benefit others." That afternoon, Thompson had a unique opportunity to put his week of learning into practice. A senior officer who was scheduled to testify had been called away on an emergency, and his rookie partner was suddenly thrust into testifying in his place. The young officer was visibly nervous, his hands shaking as he reviewed his notes outside the courtroom. Thompson recognized the look of panic in the rookie's eyes. He had worn the same expression just a week ago. Making a decision, he approached the nervous officer. "Hey," Thompson said, pulling up a chair. "Got a few minutes? I've learned some things about testifying that might help." For the next 15 minutes, Thompson shared his recent insights about courtroom protocol, proper addressing of the judge, and the importance of clear, professional testimony. The rookie officer listened intently, his nervous fidgeting gradually subsiding as Thompson walked him through what to expect. When the rookie took the stand, his testimony wasn't perfect, but it was respectful and professional. Judge Richardson noticed Thompson sitting in the gallery, watching with evident investment in his fellow officer's performance. The judge allowed himself a small smile. The lesson was taking root in unexpected ways. After court adjourned for the day, Thompson made his usual trip to the court library. The librarian had become a valuable mentor, helping him understand the historical context of the cases he was studying. Today, she had pulled records from several landmark cases that had been heard in courtroom 304. "This one might interest you," she said, sliding over a file from the 1960s. It was about a young officer who arrested a civil rights activist. The case changed not just the officer's perspective, but the entire department's approach to community relations. As Thompson read through the case files, he found himself drawing parallels to his own journey. The officer in the case had also started with preconceived notions and rigid thinking, but the experience had transformed him into one of the department's most respected community liaisons. That evening, as Thompson wrote his daily reflection, he found himself writing about more than just the day's proceedings. He wrote about the responsibility that came with wearing the badge, about the importance of understanding the human stories behind every case, and about how true respect had to be earned, not demanded. The courthouse security guard stopped by as Thompson was finishing his writing. "You're here later than usual tonight," the guard observed. Thompson nodded, gesturing to his notebook. "Just trying to get something right," he replied. "You know, a week ago, I thought this assignment was just about learning courtroom protocol. But it's about so much more than that, isn't it?" The guard leaned against the doorframe. "You know what I've learned in my 15 years here? This building, these courtrooms, they're like a mirror. They show us who we really are, not just who we think we are." As Thompson packed up his things, he paused to look around the empty courtroom. The evening light filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. A week ago, he had seen this room as just another stop in his daily routine. Now he understood it was much more. It was a place where justice wasn't just an idea, but a daily practice that required dedication, respect, and humility from everyone involved. Walking to his car, Thompson reflected on how much had changed in just 7 days. He still had more than 3 weeks left of his assignment, but already he could feel the difference in himself. The badge on his chest felt different now, less like a symbol of authority and more like a reminder of responsibility. As he drove home, Thompson thought about the nervous rookie he had helped today. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start compiling his notes into something that might help other officers avoid the mistakes he had made. Perhaps his 30 days of learning could serve a purpose beyond his own education. 2 weeks into his courthouse assignment, Officer Thompson arrived to find an unexpected scene. A group of rookie officers from the latest academy class was huddled in the back of courtroom 304, their training sergeant speaking to them in hushed tones. As Thompson took his usual seat, the sergeant caught his eye and nodded in recognition. During the morning break, the sergeant approached Thompson. "Hope you don't mind the audience today," he said. "Word got around about your daily reflections. Thought my rookies could benefit from seeing what you've been observing." Thompson felt a mix of embarrassment and pride. "I'm just learning myself, Sergeant," he replied honestly. "Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who are still learning," the sergeant said. "Would you mind talking to them during lunch? Share your perspective?" The morning session featured a complex case involving a domestic dispute. Thompson found himself watching not just the testifying officers, but also the rookies' reactions. He could see his former self in their expressions, the subtle hints of judgment, the unconscious assumptions, the silent impatience with the legal process. During lunch, Thompson met with the rookie group in a small conference room. Looking at their eager faces, he took a deep breath and began, "2 weeks ago, I sat where you're sitting now, thinking I knew everything about being a good officer. I was wrong." For the next hour, Thompson shared his experiences and insights. He talked about the importance of body language in court, the power of respectful communication, and the deep impact that officer testimony could have on people's lives. The rookies listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. One rookie raised her hand. "But isn't all this courtroom stuff just formality? I mean, we're out there doing the real police work." Thompson smiled, remembering how he'd had the same thought. "Let me tell you about a case I witnessed last week," he began. He described how an officer's professional testimony had helped a domestic violence victim find the courage to press charges. That officer's courtroom conduct gave her confidence in the system. That's not just formality, that's justice in action. After lunch, Judge Richardson observed the group of rookies now sitting behind Thompson, all mimicking his attentive note-taking style. The judge suppressed a smile, recognizing how one lesson was naturally multiplying into many. The afternoon brought a case that tested Thompson's growing wisdom. A fellow officer, one he'd graduated with from the academy, was struggling with his testimony. Thompson could see the same arrogance in his former classmate that he had displayed 2 weeks ago. During a brief recess, Thompson approached his old academy mate. "Hey," he said quietly, "mind if I offer some advice?" His former classmate looked skeptical but nodded. Thompson shared some quick tips about addressing the judge and presenting evidence. More importantly, he shared his own story of transformation. "Trust me," he said, "I learned this the hard way." When court resumed, the difference in the officer's testimony was subtle but noticeable. Judge Richardson made a note in his daily log about the improvement, adding another observation to his growing file on Thompson's progress. Later that afternoon, the court clerk stopped by Thompson's seat with a stack of files. "Judge Richardson thought you might find these interesting," she said. "They're cases where officer testimony made a crucial difference, both good and bad." As Thompson reviewed the files, he began to see a pattern. The most effective testimonies came from officers who understood they were part of a larger system of justice, not just authority figures reciting facts. That evening, as Thompson worked on his daily reflection, the veteran bailiff approached him. "You know," the bailiff said, settling into a nearby chair, "I've been watching you these past 2 weeks. You remind me of another officer who had a similar experience years ago." The bailiff shared a story about an officer from the 1990s who had also learned humility in this very courtroom. That officer had gone on to become one of the department's most respected captains, known for his emphasis on professional development and community relations. "Whatever you're learning here," the bailiff concluded, "it's not just for you. It's for every person who'll interact with you throughout your career." As Thompson drove home that evening, he reflected on how his perspective had shifted. The courthouse was no longer just a building where he occasionally had to testify. It was a place of transformation, where justice wasn't just served but shaped by the actions and attitudes of everyone involved. He thought about the rookies he'd spoken to today, remembering their eager faces and thoughtful questions. Perhaps his mistake and subsequent learning could serve a greater purpose, helping future officers understand what he had failed to grasp initially. At home, Thompson pulled out his growing collection of notes and reflections. He began organizing them into a format that could be shared with other officers. His personal embarrassment had transformed into a determination to help others avoid his mistakes. As he worked, Thompson received a text message from the training sergeant: "The rookies can't stop talking about what they learned today. Sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected teachers." Looking at his uniform hanging in the closet, ready for tomorrow, Thompson felt a new sense of purpose. He was only halfway through his 30-day assignment, but already he could see how this experience would shape not just his career, but potentially the careers of others. The badge on his dresser caught the evening light, and Thompson paused in his writing. 2 weeks ago, it had been just a symbol of authority to him. Now he understood it was something more, a symbol of responsibility, of service, and of the continuous learning that came with wearing it. 3 weeks into his courthouse assignment, Officer Thompson noticed something different as he entered the building. The security guards weren't just greeting him, they were eagerly sharing observations about officers they'd seen testifying the previous afternoon. His daily presence had somehow turned into a collaborative learning experience for everyone involved. "You should have seen it," one guard said excitedly. "This officer was so nervous, but then he remembered what you said about proper courtroom conduct." Complete transformation mid-testimony. As Thompson settled into his usual spot in courtroom 304, he found a note on his seat. It was from Judge Richardson: "See me in chambers during lunch break." Thompson felt a momentary flutter of anxiety, reminded of that first day 3 weeks ago, but it was different now. The courthouse had become a place of growth, not intimidation. The morning session brought a challenging case involving a traffic stop that had led to a significant drug bust. The testifying officer was a veteran with 15 years of experience, but something about his testimony seemed rehearsed, almost mechanical. Thompson noticed subtle signs of discomfort in the judge's posture, things he would have missed 3 weeks ago. During a brief recess, the veteran officer approached Thompson. "Hey, I've been hearing about your notes on effective testimony. Mind sharing some insights?" The request caught Thompson off guard, a veteran asking him, a rookie, for advice. Over coffee, Thompson shared what he had learned about connecting with the human aspect of testimony. "It's not just about reciting facts," he explained. "It's about helping the court understand the complete picture of what happened and why it matters." When court resumed, the difference in the veteran officer's testimony was remarkable. He spoke with renewed engagement, painting a clear picture of the traffic stop that helped everyone in the courtroom understand the situation better. Judge Richardson's subtle nod of approval didn't escape Thompson's notice. During lunch, Thompson made his way to the judge's chambers, knocking respectfully on the heavy wooden door. "Come in, Officer Thompson," Judge Richardson called out. The judge's office was exactly as Thompson had imagined, walls lined with law books, certificates, and historical photographs of the courthouse. Judge Richardson gestured to a chair. "I've been reviewing your progress," he began, picking up a folder thick with daily reflections and observer reports. "Your transformation over these 3 weeks has been remarkable," the judge continued. "But what's more interesting is the effect you're having on others. The court clerk tells me officers are arriving earlier to discuss proper testimony. The bailiff reports improved courtroom conduct across the board." Thompson listened intently as Judge Richardson shared his observations. "What you've learned here," the judge said, "it's creating ripples. Other judges have noticed. The district attorney's office has noticed. Even defense attorneys are commenting on the improved quality of officer testimony." The judge leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "I'm considering implementing a formal court orientation program for new officers, based on your experience. Would you be interested in helping develop it?" Thompson felt a surge of responsibility. "It would be an honor, Your Honor," he replied, meaning every word. That afternoon, Thompson observed court proceedings with new purpose, taking detailed notes not just for himself, but for a program that could help future officers. He watched as a rookie officer handled a difficult cross-examination with remarkable poise, remembering their conversation from the previous week about staying focused under pressure. During the afternoon recess, the court clerk shared an observation. "You know what's different now," she said, organizing files at her desk. "Officers aren't just coming here to testify anymore. They're coming to be part of the justice process. There's a difference." As Thompson wrote his daily reflection that evening, he was interrupted by the arrival of several officers from his precinct. They were scheduled to testify the next day and had heard about his informal coaching sessions. "We know you're usually heading out by now," one officer said apologetically, "but we were hoping you could share some pointers." Thompson looked at his half-finished reflection, then back at his colleagues. "Of course," he said, pulling up extra chairs. "Let's start with the basics of courtroom presence." For the next hour, Thompson shared what he had learned about effective testimony. He talked about body language, voice projection, and the importance of connecting with everyone in the courtroom. But mostly, he emphasized the responsibility that came with being part of the justice system. "Every time we take the stand," he explained, "we're not just representing ourselves or our department. We're representing the entire justice system to everyone in that courtroom." As they wrapped up the impromptu session, one of the officers shook Thompson's hand. "You know, when we first heard about what happened with you and Judge Richardson, some of us laughed. But look at you now, you're changing how we all approach this part of the job." Later that night, as Thompson finally finished his reflection, he found himself writing about more than just the day's events. He wrote about the unexpected ways that personal growth could inspire change in others. He wrote about how a moment of humility had led to a mission of improvement. Looking at his calendar, Thompson realized he had just 1 week left in his assignment. The thought brought mixed emotions, pride in how far he'd come, but also a sense of responsibility for what lay ahead. The courthouse had become more than just a place of learning, it had become a community where he had found his true purpose as an officer. As he packed up his materials, Thompson paused to look around the empty courtroom. The evening light cast long shadows across the floor, reminiscent of that first humbling day. But now, those shadows seemed to point forward, toward a future where respect, professionalism, and continuous learning were part of every officer's courtroom experience. On the final morning of his 30-day assignment, Officer Thompson arrived at the courthouse before dawn. The sky was just beginning to lighten as he stood on the steps, remembering that first day when he had sauntered in with such misplaced confidence. Now, those same steps felt like the pathway to his own transformation. Inside, the courthouse was quietly coming to life. The cleaning crew was finishing their morning routine, and the early arriving staff members were setting up for the day ahead. Thompson made his way to courtroom 304, where it had all begun, only to find he wasn't alone. Judge Richardson was already there, sitting at his bench in the dim light. "Good morning, Officer Thompson," he said, his voice echoing in the empty courtroom. "I thought I might find you here early today." As Thompson approached the bench with appropriate respect, he noticed something different. The courtroom was gradually filling with people, court staff, officers, attorneys, and even some of the rookies he had mentored. They filed in quietly, taking seats in the gallery. "Your 30 days are officially complete," Judge Richardson began, "but before we return to regular proceedings, I believe it's appropriate to acknowledge what has happened here." The judge picked up a familiar folder, the collection of Thompson's daily reflections. These pages document more than just your personal growth. They represent a transformation that has affected this entire courthouse community. The judge gestured to the gathering crowd. "Everyone here has witnessed your journey from that first day. But more importantly, they've been part of the change you've inspired." One by one, people began to stand and share their observations. The court clerk spoke about how officers now arrived early to prepare, showing respect for the proceedings before they even began. The bailiff mentioned the improved atmosphere in the courtroom and how it affected everyone from defendants to witnesses. Veteran officers described how Thompson's experience had reminded them of their own early lessons and helped them become better mentors. A senior attorney stood up, addressing Thompson directly. "You've changed how we see rookie officers," she said. "Your willingness to learn and share that learning has created a new standard of professionalism in this courthouse." As Thompson listened to each speaker, he felt the weight of his badge differently than he had 30 days ago. It was no longer just a symbol of authority, it was a reminder of the responsibility he carried and the community he served. Judge Richardson held up a document. "This morning, I signed the official order implementing the court officer orientation program we discussed. Your experience here has become the foundation for training future officers in proper courtroom conduct and understanding of the justice system." The judge then did something unexpected. He stepped down from the bench and approached Thompson. 30 days ago, I saw a young officer who needed to learn respect. Today, I see a leader who has earned it." He extended his hand, and Thompson shook it with genuine gratitude. "But," the judge continued with a slight smile, "your real test begins now. Taking these lessons back to your daily duties, sharing them with others, and maintaining the standards you've set for yourself, that's the true measure of growth." Thompson looked around the courtroom, at the faces of people who had become more than just courthouse staff. They were now partners in the pursuit of justice. He thought about his first day, about the arrogant young officer he had been, and about the person he had become. "Your Honor," Thompson began, his voice clear and confident, "when I first entered this courtroom 30 days ago, I thought I knew what it meant to wear this badge. I was wrong. What I've learned here, what everyone here has helped me learn, is that true authority comes from respect, understanding, and service." He turned to address the gathered crowd. "Each of you has taught me something valuable. From the security guards who showed me the importance of starting each day with respect, to the court clerk who demonstrated how every role in this system matters, to my fellow officers who shared their own experiences and helped me grow." As the morning sun finally filled the courtroom, Judge Richardson returned to his bench. "Officer Thompson, your official assignment here is complete. But remember, this courthouse will always be part of your journey. The lessons you've learned and shared will continue to influence others long after today." The regular morning session was about to begin, and people started moving to their usual positions. As Thompson prepared to take his seat one last time, a group of rookie officers approached him. "We're testifying today," one said nervously. "Any final advice?" Thompson smiled, remembering his own nervousness from what seemed like a lifetime ago. "Remember," he said, "when you step into this courtroom, you're not just representing yourself or even the department. You're part of a system that works best when everyone, from the judge to the janitor, is treated with respect and dignity." As the bailiff called the court to order, Thompson sat in his familiar spot one last time. He opened his notebook, ready to take notes not because he had to, but because he wanted to. His 30-day assignment was ending, but his real journey, as a mentor, leader, and servant of justice, was just beginning. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, casting long rays across the courtroom floor. In that light, Officer Thompson saw not just the end of his assignment, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where the lessons of respect, humility, and professional growth would guide not just his career, but the careers of countless officers to come. Looking up at Judge Richardson's bench, Thompson remembered the words that had started his journey of transformation. Now, those words weren't just a lesson, they were a foundation for everything that would follow. The cocky rookie cop who had walked into this courtroom 30 days ago was gone, replaced by an officer who understood that true authority comes not from a badge, but from the respect one shows for the law, the system, and most importantly, for every person whose life is touched by it.